Thank you, Paul. And just one correction. I am a senator. I worked with Greenpeace International for over 20 years. I wasn't the campaign director, but I was involved in many, many campaigns over that long period. And I was the manager of human resources. And I'm very, very grateful to Joe for the invitation to be here today. It's a huge honour to speak at the MacGill Summer School. It's renowned throughout Ireland. I'm from the south of the country, and everyone is very familiar every summer when they hear that MacGill Summer School up in Donegal is taking place in Glenties. So it's truly a great privilege for me to be here today. So the debate asks us if we are facing up to climate change. In other words, do our deeds match our words? I would say we have really quite a long way to go in putting the action into climate. Our new department has the word climate, but it really needs a lot of action. Nowhere has this been better illustrated than at the recent Paris climate talks, where our Taoiseach, Mr. Enda Kenny, appeared to me a little bit like the lazy student who hadn't opened a book all year, asking his teacher, could he have an extension for his overdue essay, asking again for a special exemption for Ireland. Special pleading has defined the Irish approach to climate policy, with requests for exemptions and derogations where in fact innovative policy proposals and genuine action should take place. Yesterday, as you all know, was a very hot day. In fact, it was the hottest day of what so far has been the hottest year on record in Ireland. We are seeing the effects of climate change already in changing weather patterns and disruptions to our natural system. If we're asking, do each of us accept the scientific advice, which is vast in scale, reaffirmed almost every day of every month of every year? We're finding new data sets which show a problem for the most part getting worse. Then yes, thankfully, all parties in the Oireachtas, key stakeholders such as Joe in the IFA and his colleagues, and the vast majority, I believe, of Irish citizens are starting to approach the problem from a rational, evidence-based perspective. But if we delve a bit deeper, really what we're discussing today is, do each of us approach the problem of climate change from the same starting point, the same vantage point? Is there a consensus on the level of urgency required to counter runaway climate change? Well, as you know, the Green Party is back in the Oireachtas, and we're determined, three of us, 2 TDs and myself, the Senator, and all of our team and our supporters, to put climate change front and centre once again. Ours is a vision of positive change, of grasping the opportunities as well as the nettle, to create a new economy that can allow us to sustain our citizens and prosper long into the future. We need new methods of generating energy, new ways of farming, of fishing, of forestry, new transport systems and new ways of building and heating our homes. We believe we must develop and create a secure future for everyone and address some of the most serious problems in our society. We must seize on the chances and help lead the journey towards a more sustainable future. That, for me, is the key to approaching the climate problem. I live in rural Ireland, down in Tramore, County Waterford. I'm from a business and farming background. I come from the small coastal community that has seen a lot of change over the years. I see how the way in which our economy has evolved and has threatened and in some cases destroyed the livelihoods of those in the fishing industry. How the large scale has won out over the sustainable. When I left Ireland in the early 1980s, I saw this on an even larger scale. In 1986, when I travelled to Antarctica on board the Greenpeace ship called Greenpeace, that was 1986, and people were just starting to talk about climate change. We saw the disintegration of a large ice shelf called the Larsen Ice Shelf. The first portion of it, Larsen A, was broken up and melted by 1995. In 2002, a portion of Larsen B, almost the size of Leinster and Connacht combined, dramatically broke off into the sea and is melting. It's a process that's continuing today. During my time in the Marshall Islands, a group of coral islands low-lying in the Pacific Ocean, I got to appreciate the scale of the threat that rising sea levels represents to the islanders there, and now threatens all of us too. And I actually met Mr. Healy-Rae just a few days after his great statement on climate change. And I said to him that, believe me, if you would come with me to meet the islanders on these atolls, low-lying atolls in the Pacific Island, you would understand that climate change is real. Time and again, I've seen how once the scale of a threat is realised, our failure to take small but essential steps at the outset to ensure against future disaster has made the steps necessary now much, much larger and more difficult. Failure to meet our EU renewable energy target of 16% by 2020 will result in fines of €150 million per percentage point missed. Last year, we only reached 8%. For me, the key test of whether we are facing up to our climate challenge is this. Are we willing to accept the need for corrective action now to stave off a social, economic and environmental tragedy in the years to come? And the challenge is this: to take whatever steps necessary to ensure that the average global near-surface temperature does not rise more than 1.5 degrees. Our collective response in Ireland, I'm afraid to say, has so far failed the test. When the Taoiseach, as I said earlier, went to the climate summit in Paris in December last year and publicly pleaded a special case for Ireland, we essentially were admitting to the world that Ireland's response is conditional, it's going to be slow, and we do not recognise the urgency with which action is actually required. That claim was made due to our unique emissions profile. Like New Zealand and Lithuania, Ireland's emissions have a distinctly green tinge, with agriculture projected to make up almost half of our non-ETS emissions by 2020. That's the emission trading scheme system. Much of this has been made by the contribution of beef and dairy production. It's true that some progress has been made. Emissions declined slightly in the last years, but unfortunately are now back on the rise again, and steeply. The EPA estimates, based on Chagas research, that if we meet the overarching objectives of Foodwise 2025, emissions in agriculture will rise by as much as 7% by 2020. That includes a growth in the dairy cow herd of 16% on 2016 levels and a growth in nitrogen fertiliser use of 21% in the same period. Transport emissions are expected to increase by 16% in the period leading to 2020. However, the EPA estimates that they will only rise by 10% should we succeed in reaching the 10% renewable fuel use and deploy 50,000 electric cars on our roads. Currently, we have less than 1,000. DART Underground, the one project that could have taken thousands of cars off the Dublin roads, has been delayed indefinitely. So enormous increases are projected in our two biggest polluting sectors, agriculture and transport. accounting for 76% of emissions in 2020. The official government policy at the moment shows very little appetite for limiting these increases. In fact, it's fueling them. To put that into context of our international obligations, the EPA also estimates that our non-European ETS emissions will be between 6% and 11% below 2005 levels in 2020. That is well below the 20% mandatory reduction target and leaves us, again, potentially liable for vast fines. All this calls for a new approach to the climate policy in Ireland. We Greens support the EU harmonised approach to energy and climate and agree that such policies should be tackled together with our EU partners. What has to stop is our slavish adherence to the letter of these laws while trying to avoid the spirit of them at every turn. We have to better balance the need to feed well our own population, continue to develop a valuable and sustainable export market, and meet our obligations to lessen the impact of our way of life has on the long-term viability of life on Earth. It would be the ultimate irony should we endanger our farmer way of life through changes wrought by increased drought, more violent storms and flooding, and other disruption to our natural weather patterns that have made Ireland so uniquely suited to the type of agriculture we currently have. We saw the cruel effects of climate change in 2013, in the 2013 fodder crisis, something that wreaked havoc in the farming communities across the country. We need to be serious about our approach to the challenges of climate change, but we also need to be original and creative. Last Thursday, I attended the launch of the latest report from the Climate Smart Agriculture Leadership Forum in Dublin. It's a joint initiative of the Institute of International and European Affairs and the RDS, the Royal Dublin Society. The report gave a lot of food for thought on how we might tailor an approach to climate crisis that both recognised Ireland as an overpolluter, whilst also aiming to maximise our potential in a newly structured rural economy. The report notes that Ireland's island status offers us both challenges and opportunities for the future. Coming from a marine background, this is an area of particular interest to me. The world's oceans are by far the biggest store of greenhouse gases. Indeed, their absorption of about 26% of all greenhouse gases that we have produced to date is the only reason we are still here and lucky to be here in Glenties to talk about the problem of climate change. But since 2000, that rate of absorption has slowed, and rising temperatures and ocean acidification means that dumping carbon dioxide into our seas, as we do plastic waste, is no longer an option. The seas around us can still help us, though, in other ways. Ireland is a maritime nation, a nation where fish and seafood products have played an important role in sustaining our population. We are only now considering new ways in which we can seize on the potential of the waters around us, such as truly sustainable aquaculture with stable and low-impact feed systems and proper controls. We need a fisheries system that recognises the science and prizes the small and the independent over the large and the industrial. Such expansions can contribute to a greater share of a healthier diet and help lower the impact of other less efficient sources of food. We are slowly emerging here in Ireland from a severe economic crisis, albeit disproportionately in terms of urban-rural recovery. I understand that there are people who will resist our call for change. Those struggling on low incomes, farmers who are fighting off increasing threats to their livelihood, businesses looking forward to expansion. Ultimately, we go out and work in order to make our lives better, and crucially, to make the lives better for our families and communities. The reason I'm standing here saying this is because, as it stands, we are going to hand a crisis to future generations that by 2050 will dwarf the banking crisis in scale and effect. Consider this. Policy change in many countries is hard because of path dependence, where decisions made in the past tend to lock governments into a specific course of action. It's harder to make big changes. In Ireland especially, our government is reactive, not proactive, tactical, not strategic. We sign up to the UN climate deals and the EU climate policies with one hand, whilst the other hand pushes for unconstrained expansion of our industry and agriculture with no thought to the long-term effects. Because of this, I fear we are heading for the worst of both worlds. We take no steps now to meet our targets, we fail, we are fined hundreds of millions of euros, and only then, and through this, is there forced political will to make any positive changes. Of course, the economic cost in the future of mitigating against climate change is going to be far higher than it is now. So we are essentially fined twice. Another way is possible. I have ambition that we can create a new prosperous economy based on sustainable agriculture, aquaculture and fisheries, an integrated, decentralised, renewable and innovative energy system, and a sustainable transport network that works for commuters, creates better public spaces and doesn't damage our health or our climate. Only when climate considerations are embedded in every aspect of our governance can we make these opportunities a reality. The Green Party has learnt over the past 20 years that trying to lecture or frighten people into action on climate change, it has not and does not work. We are now committed to a collaborative approach that engages citizens and asks that we work together to help solve our climate challenges. We want to be part of the opportunity inherent in this challenge. And in the past, the Greens and the farmers may have had a challenging relationship, but I'm hoping for a change in that climate in the future. It has always been my view that farmers are the custodians of the land, and in that spirit, I wish to extend my full support for opening dialogue with Joe and the IFA and farming communities, fishing communities, NGOs, and others to help forge a new path of prosperity and sustainability for Ireland and the rest of the world. So with that, I will say my door is always open. Thank you.